About half an hour before the Soviet Union's Soyuz spacecraft was scheduled to touch down on June 30th, 1971, in the plains of Kazakhstan, a flight control center in Yevpatoria in western Crimea was met with an unexpected silence. 3 Soviet cosmonauts, Georgy Dobrovolsky, Vladislav Volkov, and Viktor Patsayev, were making their descent to Earth after a record-breaking time spent aboard the Salyut-1 space station, where they performed experiments and explored the then many unknowns of human space habitation. The mission, Soyuz 11, launched on June 6, 1971. By the time of the Apollo 11 moon landing 2 years prior, the longest time humans spent in space was only about 2 weeks. The Soviet crew had spent 23 days in space, setting a new record for human spaceflight endurance, and were finally coming home. As the ship made its re-entry, one crew communicator back at Yevpatoria expressed concerns about the lack of reports from the cosmonauts. Quote, "We asked Dobrovolsky the whole time to give us a running commentary as soon as the descent module enters our coverage zone, but he hasn't said a word," crew communicator Alexei Yeliseyev said, according to Boris Chertok, a space engineer who recounted the mission in his 4-volume memoir, Rockets and People. It's strange that Volkov is quiet. During the last session, he was very talkative. The module carrying the men landed around 2 a.m., about 56 miles southwest of the town of Karajal. A rescue team was immediately dispatched. Chertok recalled there were another 20 minutes of silence when the team received no reports. Finally, one lead Soviet engineer, with a disturbed expression on his face, would break the news he received from Moscow. Seated, quote, in tranquil poses, Chertok wrote, the 3 cosmonauts were found dead inside the ship. After the moon race. The Soyuz 11 mission launched as the public's interest in the space arena waned. By then, Apollo 11 landed on the moon in 1969, which many historians argue was the hallmark event that settled the great space race between the US and the Soviet Union. Quote, "I think there was a kind of fascination in the 60s with space, and this presented all sorts of cultural things like Star Trek." Asif A. Siddiqui, a Fordham University history professor who wrote extensively on the Soviet space program and edited Chertok's memoirs, said in an interview with Insider. "But I think after the moon race, people just lost interest. People were saying that there's deeper problems at home that we should be devoting our money to." Still, there was much to explore about space and many milestones yet to be broken. Scientists had limited knowledge of the impacts of prolonged weightlessness on the human body, for example. The longest humans had spent in space by the time of the landmark moon landing was about 2 weeks. The Soviets were always interested in the long-term effects of human beings in space, Siddiqui said. You couldn't really think about going anywhere, like Mars, unless you really understood how the human body would react. To recoup the loss of the moon race, the Soviets quickly pivoted to a space station program. They gathered existing equipment and hastily put together a space station that was launched on April 19, 1971. The ship was named Salyut-1 and was the world's first space station to orbit the Earth. The first attempt to send cosmonauts to the ship occurred merely 3 days after Salyut-1's launch, but the 4-man crew failed to dock and returned to Earth in less than 2 days. The next attempt came during a notably perfect June in southern Kazakhstan, Chertok wrote. It had rained recently, accompanied by an unusually cold wind for that time of year, he recalled. As one might expect, the Tyuratam old-timers tried to convince us that they couldn't recall such a pleasant early June. These men were assigned to Soyuz 11. However, just 2 days before the scheduled launch, the discovery of a spot, quote, the size of a chicken egg inside a flight engineer's right lung would alter the fate of the cosmonauts, according to Chertok. A backup crew consisting of Dobrovolsky, the commander, Volkov, the flight engineer, and Patsayev, a research engineer, would replace the primary team. One engineer rationalized, "A new crew that hasn't worked together will be worse than the backup crew," Chertok wrote. Another leap for mankind. Soyuz 11 launched on June 6, 1971. The 3 cosmonauts would make a landmark achievement by successfully docking onto Salyut-1 the very next day. The space station was of modest size, comparable to a 2- or 3-bedroom apartment, according to Siddiqui. A lot of the research conducted inside Salyut-1 was related to biomedicine, but the crew performed a wide range of experiments. According to NASA, Patsayev was the first to operate a telescope in space. Inside the Oasis chamber, the cosmonauts grew Chinese cabbage and onions. Patsayev became the first person to celebrate their birthday in space, and the men cast their ballots for the Soviet elections. Scientists also wanted to closely monitor the impacts of space on the human body. A treadmill was installed on the Salyut 1, and the cosmonauts forewent their spacesuits in the space station and Soyuz. One of the things they were envisioning is that they wanted to get rid of the spacesuits because they were trying to secure the spacecraft so that you wouldn't need spacesuits, Siddiqui said. It was a concession made in the early days when you weren't sure if the spaceships themselves were secure and safe. So they moved the safety consideration from the suit to the ship. And without the suits, you could put in more stuff because it becomes spacious inside. The cosmonauts experienced setbacks, including a small fire on board, as well as, quote, personality conflicts, according to Siddiqui. But the crew successfully breached an 18-day record, also set by the Soviets, in 1970. In total, they spent about 22 days docked at the station. Chertok, the space engineer and author of Rockets and People, recalled the day the cosmonauts reached the milestone in his memoir with little fanfare. We departed from the Crimea after agreeing that Dobrovolsky's crew should set a new record for time spent in space. A preliminary landing date of 30 June was set, he wrote. Tragedy inside Soyuz 11. Almost everything about the Soyuz 11 spacecraft functioned as intended. The Soyuz spacecraft is a very automated ship, so you don't have to do much, Siddiqui said. The program to return the Soyuz just kept operating, and it operated perfectly. The descent module that carried the three men oriented itself. The parachute deployed, and in the early hours of June 30th, 1971, the ship landed softly in the steppes of Kazakhstan. According to Chertok's memoir, a report also stated that the cosmonauts were in good physical condition in the last few days of their journey. But a few missteps on the ship and by the Soviet space program led to the tragic deaths of the cosmonauts. Michael Smith, a Cold War historian at Purdue University who studied the Soviet space program, told Insider that he teaches Soyuz 11 as a case study in risk planning. Soyuz 11 consisted of 3 modules. At the front of the ship is a module that operates like the crew's workspace. In the middle is the cabin for the 3 men. And behind is the service module that carries the engine and power source. In order to split the modules, small cartridges containing tiny explosives set off at a precise moment in a sequence. However, according to prevailing theory, the cartridges fired off at the same time, Siddiqui said. The shock of the explosion caused a valve in the cabin to open while the ship was at a lethal altitude. The module quickly decompressed, and in a matter of seconds, the cosmonauts lost consciousness. Without spacesuits and emergency oxygen to protect them, the cosmonauts perished, Smith said. Just 2 minutes after landing, a rescue team in a helicopter made contact with the module lying on its side. Chertok recalled a report he heard from Kerim Kerimov, one of the key founders of the Soviet space program. They quickly opened the hatch. All 3 were sitting in their seats in tranquil poses. There were dark blue spots on their faces. Blood was running from the nose and ears. They pulled him out of the descent module. Dobrovolsky was still warm. Doctors continued to perform artificial resuscitation. According to the reports from the landing site, death was the result of asphyxiation. An autopsy report conducted afterward made a harrowing impression, Chertok wrote. Mentally placing themselves into the descent module, everyone tried to imagine how the cosmonauts felt during those first seconds. The excruciating pain throughout their bodies prevented them from thinking and comprehending. Certainly, they heard the whistle of escaping air, but their eardrums quickly burst and silence set in. Judging by the speed of the drop in pressure, they were able to actively move and attempt to do something for perhaps the first 15 to 20 seconds. The valve opened at about a 105-mile altitude above the Kármán line, an imaginary boundary often used to determine when spaceflight is reached. Dobrovolsky, Volkov, and Patsayev are the only humans to date to have died beyond that line. Had the cosmonauts been wearing spacesuits, the 3 men certainly could have survived the event of depressurization, Siddiqui said. However, another pitfall of the mission was insufficient testing, which was partly due to the haste created by the space race. A lot of failures of the spaceship don't appear immediately, Siddiqui said. You have to sometimes test it 50 times before something shows up, so they didn't fly these things enough to really know how it would react. Thank you for watching! And please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and enable post alerts to view more of our future videos. After saying that, keep watching our videos, and I'll speak with you in the next one.